Okay, my name is John Bright. I'm an employee of the Thunder Bay National Marine Sanctuary, and I'm here presenting this morning on behalf of NOAA's National Marine Sanctuary Program, as well as NOAA's Great Lakes Environmental Research Lab. And what distinguishes this presentation is we're discussing mapping activities over the last year that are being conducted off of NOAA-owned vessels in the Great Lakes using equipment owned by NOAA and primarily with personnel on board those vessels conducting the acquisition, the data processing, and reporting, also being NOAA employees or affiliates. So this is kind of separated from the work Coast Survey is doing, where they're deploying teams to the region and conducting their mapping scopes, as well as private sector partners like Geodynamics doing similar work. And in reality, all of this stuff is basically happening simultaneously out in the lakes, which I think speaks to the volume of effort being put forth by the agency to meet the goals of conducting high resolution mapping in the Great Lakes. So everyone in attendance will be, if they weren't already, well informed about the organizational structure of NOAA, having seen the last two presentations and now getting a bit about the National Marine Sanctuary Program. So like Coast Survey, the National Marine Sanctuary Program is within the National Ocean Service, and it is a series of protected areas throughout the United States and its territorial waters, with a few of those sites being in the Great Lakes. And up until recently, Thunder Bay National Marine Sanctuary was the only freshwater National Marine Sanctuary site. And even now this map is out of date, where for the past several years, a proposed sanctuary in Lake Michigan along the Wisconsin shore was in the process of being nominated, reviewed, and approved. And now it has been established as a marine sanctuary site. The superintendent, Russ Green, is here. So the little yellow square has been promoted to a full-fledged blue dot on this map. Oh, go all the way back to the beginning. Right, the Thunder Bay National Marine Sanctuary is a 4,300 square mile area of Michigan's Lake Huron coast, from the coastline out to the US-Canadian border, encompassing the water off of 3 counties, within which there are over 100 known cultural resource sites and many more which have yet to be discovered. They're being indicated in the historical record as having been lost somewhere in these vicinities. And this geography encompasses a whole range of geological features, types and geomorphologies of lakebed. There's a lot of variety, from shallow coastal waters to the basins far offshore. And the mission of the sanctuary to document and protect cultural resource sites within this geography has compelled us to become fluent in geophysical and remote sensing survey methods, so that we're capable of locating, identifying, characterizing, and monitoring sites that in some cases can't be accessed by people or by many other means easily. So in 20 years of the sanctuary operating, we have been trying to build an increasing capacity for using geophysical and remote sensing survey tools. Now, the brick and mortar of the sanctuary is based in Alpena, Michigan. There's a Great Lakes Maritime Heritage Center building there, which is the center of a growing campus that supports our administration, operation, public outreach activities that extend onto the water and include things like deploying buoys at shipwreck sites. But we also have a fairly prolific on-water research and operations program, which is supported by NOAA's Great Lakes Environmental Research Laboratory. They are in a separate NOAA line office. They're in the Oceanic and Atmospheric Research Program, and they partner with the Sanctuary Program to support both Thunder Bay and now Wisconsin Shipwreck Coast operations. And they have a more broad geographical mission to support the conduct of science within the entire Great Lakes region. So the partnership of the GLERL unit with the sanctuary sites that have these very specific geographies that they're working in allows us to access their vessels and resources and expertise, and which we can support in return with our expertise and ability to support work they do when it may be beyond a sanctuary's boundary. So there's this sort of synergy of these two groups within separate line offices partnering to help each other complete their respective missions. All of the geophysical survey work that we are doing in the Great Lakes is occurring on board GLERL vessels with a combination of GLERL and ONMS resources, so computers, sonar equipment, personnel. And these are all crewed platforms, crewed with a W, not a U. And if you've been around the Great Lakes for a while, you've probably seen many of these platforms and may not have known that some of them can actually be integrated with geophysical survey equipment and conduct survey operations. So on this slide here in the upper left, as y'all are sitting, is the RV Storm. It's kind of home ported in Alpena, Michigan, but can transit around the lakes and do work, including survey. It has integrated through-hole mount for echo sounder and other pieces of equipment, which I'll get to in a little bit, but that's a 50-foot platform that can do day operations. The bottom center image is the RV Laurentian. That's an 80-foot platform, which also has a through-hole mount for a transducer, and that can support 24-hour operations. On the upper right is a new vessel that's coming into the Great Lakes team. This is a swath boat that was decommissioned by the Navy that was brought up to the Great Lakes region by a team from GLERL and is being refitted to serve also as a dedicated geophysical survey platform. In addition to these larger boats, which move on the water, we have small trailerable platforms. The top image is the RV Echo. This was a boat that was built and operated by the National Park Service in the Apostle Islands area, also as a dedicated survey platform. It was moved over to NOAA under an agreement and is now fully under NOAA operation. So it can be trailered to a work area, deployed, and do survey operations. And then GLERL also maintains a whole host of 20 to 30-foot trailerable platforms that can be used kind of like small vessels of opportunity and do some geophysical work in addition to other tasks like ground truthing or validation work. So quite a asset in terms of this inventory of vessels that are here. And then equipment that we're using on board these boats specifically for geophysical survey. It's our endeavor and the way we've been building out this program to create a standardized package of equipment where we're using similar components on board each vessel. This helps us ensure interoperability of our people on board the boats. It gives us consistency in the types of file formats we're using so that we can produce similar files from similar instruments, and allows us to also implement very similar workflows across all of those platforms for verification, QA/QC, and data processing. So we're working with Applanix POS-NV systems that are being integrated into each of the vessels, and in some cases we can take these units out of one platform, put them on to another platform, and go run survey operations. So all the navigation being conducted with the Applanix inertial navigation systems, and then we're dependent upon post-processing that navigation in the Applanix mobile mapping suite to generate post-process files, which we apply in our data processing workflow, and that gives us the improved position accuracy, and it also supports our vertical referencing. So we do all of our vertical referencing to the IGLD 85 low water datum vertical reference datum, and we accomplish that by introducing the SPET file in post-processing, using a separation model, which we generate on a project-specific basis, and moving all of our data into that vertical reference frame. So we're dependent on this technology in our post-processing workflow to get to the quality of data output that we need to meet the standards for the bathymetric data that's generated on board those platforms. We're not, however, limited to just conducting multi-beam bathymetry. I'm gonna go down a little bit of a tangent to discuss some of the other tools we have. The bread and butter for cultural resource scientists trying to characterize man-made objects on the bottom is the use of side-scan sonar and magnetometry. And this was really how we got into this field of study, is deploying these types of instruments to locate and characterize historic shipwreck remains on the bottom of the lake. So we have Klein side-scan sonar. It's got a chip on board that allows us to tandem tow a magnetometer, and we have the ability to post-process those types of data. We can collect these independently. We can collect them as an integrated set, so we can run a side-scan survey while running multi-beam. We can run side-scan mag and multi-beam. So we have quite the capability to expand the types of instruments that are being deployed. The sanctuary in Alpena has a geometric G882 marine magnetometer. The sanctuary program has several other magnetometer units available at other sites, and access to those units allows us to develop basically take 2 units out, put them in a TVG or a transverse gradiometer frame, deploy them, and we can do gradiometer surveys in addition to the other types of surveys. But that's just a capability we have, and if those are work scopes that are required by the cultural resource scientists or by other partners, we can make that work on board many of our platforms. But the bread and butter for Lakebed 2030 is that multi-beam. So our vessels are being equipped with Kongsberg 2040C multi-beams, and we are going to expand into trying to get dual heads and other Kongsberg units on board, so we can have each vessel has its own dedicated echo sounder or set of echo sounders, its own dedicated INS and other ancillary equipment. Our real-time sound velocity corrections at the sonar head are being measured by a Valport sensor that is mounted coincident with the echo sounder head, and then we do hand casts of a sound velocity profiler at interval while we are running our online survey. We operate the Kongsberg system through the native program, the Seafloor Information Systems program, and we log the Kongsberg files in that same program, but also network online to send the multi-beam data over to our HYPACK acquisition program, so that in real time we can record both the Kongsberg files as well as the HYPACK files, track our coverage and mapping progress in real time while we're on the water. In addition to the kind of procedures and how we're doing our stuff, our online activities for collecting files, we're implementing mobilization protocols for each of these vessels because we work in the Great Lakes, and every year these boats come out of the water. In a lot of cases, equipment is being taken off the boats to go into heated storage. In the spring, we have to put everything back on board these boats. So we make sure that each vessel goes through a calibration and verification program at the start of the season, where we're doing things like the patch test, the GAMS calibration, we're doing sound velocity verifications, making sure the sensors are calibrated and reading correctly with respect to each other. We're doing sample surveys, just the standard vessel integration testing that's happening, and we're moving those results into annual reporting documents that are issued each year for each vessel and then updated as needed to ensure that each boat is in a workable condition, a verified workable condition before it starts surveying. And if we run into any issues during data acquisition where we start to see things like misalignment or data quality problems, we can go back to that set of calibration data and figure out what's going on. So some results of these platforms working. 2021, we did 2 surveys. We're showing them here in our 2022 progress, because this is actually how we started the calendar year of 2022, was processing, finishing the processing, reporting and delivery of these data sets to their respective partners. So in 2021, we worked in Lake Huron along 6 Fathom Shoals. We completed 100% bathymetric data coverage in 3 study areas, which were developed by the University of Michigan. They obtained funding through NOAA's Office of Ocean Exploration and Research to go out and conduct geophysical mapping. We deployed the RV Laurentian on 24-hour operations to complete the 2 joined study areas in a single 10-day operation. And then we finished work in that 3rd study area that's separated into the southeast with the RV Storm under a day operation tempo. We got full bathymetric coverage, we recorded backscatter, processed and delivered that to the scientists, who then went into the data and identified areas of interest for ground truthing with divers and ROVs. That is a total of 168.2 square kilometers of coverage, with depths ranging between 18 and 80 meters. In the same year, we worked over in Lake Michigan in the Manitou Passage off of Leland and adjacent to the Sleeping Bear Dunes National Lakeshore. This was also a project where 2 platforms were deployed. So the RV Laurentian did a segment of the larger offshore area in the spring, and then we came back later in the summer with the RV Echo to do the chunk that's to the north, as well as to infill some of the gaps left along that shoal line by the Laurentian. And actually the approach to doing that work was to take the Laurentian from its home port in Muskegon, Michigan, do all of the integration and testing in Muskegon and offshore in Lake Michigan, transit it over to Lake Huron to do the offshore study in Huron, and on the way there and back, stop in the Manitou Passage and conduct several days on each side of mapping operations. So making the most of that vessel transit to the forest project location to collect data at study areas that were essentially on the way, and then coming back with the small boat to complete as much of that work as we could. And in total, we got 142 square kilometers done in this study area, in depths ranging between 4 and 119 meters. There's the backscatter result that we generated and also turned over to NOAA's Office of Coast Management, who is overseeing the delineation of these study areas, the collection of the vessel-based bathymetry, as well as the aerial LiDAR data, and ensuring that where we're working overlaps with where that LiDAR data is, and then they're taking that data through to the next group of users who queue it up for analysis, validation, and ground truthing. So moving on into this year, 2022, our first mapping operation was in the Wisconsin Shipwreck Coast National Marine Sanctuary. It's a little hard to see where there's actually data on this map, these little blips at locations within the sanctuary, and these are actually individual shipwreck sites. We conducted high-resolution geophysical surveys over known shipwreck sites on behalf of the sanctuary to obtain really precise positioning on each of those locations to help the sanctuary update its database information about where these sites are located, because in some cases we had to do quite a bit of a search to actually figure out where the shipwreck site was located, and then also to use as a basis for planning mooring buoy deployments. So this is essentially a reconnaissance data set, a very high precision reconnaissance data set that'll allow us to understand the area surrounding the shipwreck, where there may be debris, and where there's a suitable location to drop the anchor for a mooring buoy system, which we can then use to plan mooring buoy deployments, come back later with a vessel that has the ability to lift and deploy these mooring systems and put them on the location that we obtain from these data sets. So in a 2-week operation that also included diving operations, photogrammetric modeling and filming, we worked on days in between that, or sometimes on the same day, to do these geophysical surveys. And there's some of the preliminary results where, depending on water depth, we were able to get stuff gridded out to 35 centimeters down to 50 centimeters in deeper water. But it was really a very effective technique, because we're collecting this multi-beam data from the same vessel that the divers are deploying from. So the boat's already out on the water with the equipment, and we're able to conduct these surveys as a part of a broader research program. Moving forward to the middle of the summer, NOAA's Great Lakes Environmental Research Lab had an interest in doing offshore exploration back in Lake Huron, looking for geological features, and in particular, active submerged sinkholes off Presqu'île and Rogers City. It looks like a really tiny coverage there, but this is actually a 20-kilometer line. We ran one line down the middle of a corridor defined by a group of scientists, and then ran wing lines along the side of that, processed it out to get bathymetry as well as a backscatter result. And the intent is to build off of this study area in years going forward, where we can segment out these run line portions, add data to them, and build out a better understanding of what's happening in deep water out in the open lake, where we know closer to shore there are active submerged sinkholes. There may be additional sinkholes which have a pretty interesting sort of ecological implication, and they need to be located so they can be studied, sampled, and studied by those scientists. Then our largest mapping operation, which is still ongoing, is occurring in Lake Superior, where, again, working with NOAA's Office of Coastal Management in the Apostle Islands area, conducting mapping operations on the eastern side of the Apostle Islands. This map shows our progress as of September 20th, when this was turned in. The PowerPoint presentation was turned in to the organizers. And since then, we've done about 5 more days and have achieved quite a bit more coverage. So we're up to just shy of 80 square kilometers there, and have almost completed the larger of the 2 mapping areas. And we will return to that area and continue working in the offshore Michigan Island study area. And again, in that study, we're getting 100% bathymetric coverage, and then we'll deliver the bathymetry and the backscatter to a science team, which will take that data and queue it up for analysis, validation, ground truthing to develop habitat maps. So that's the short version of what we've been up to. And that's what we've got. So if there's any questions anyone has, we can open it up now. Yes, sir.
It sounds, John, like you're very much an annotation, Great Lakes.
So the question is that
can just that data be fed into the NDA?
Okay, so are we operating like an NRT, and does the data that we collect feed into one of those public repositories? We are expanding our survey capability, one, to meet the programmatic needs as being outlined by NOAA's Office of Coast Management and as assigned to the Great Lakes Environmental Research Lab. So there's several study areas which are already committed to receive, to get mapped. So there'll be mapping operations that are allocated to map those areas. We have the capability to position and move these vessels within the scope of our summer schedule to do additional mapping operations as needed by partners. So these vessels aren't dedicated solely to mapping like an NRT vessel or NRT asset would be. These vessels are dedicated mostly to mapping, but can also support other science needs. Some of the vessels like the Echo and the Swath boat are pretty much mapping only platforms. You could do ROV work, you could do other types of geophysical work from them. Vessels like the Storm can support diving operations and ROV operations, etc. So we intend to service a broad array of scientific research scopes, but to have a capability for geophysical mapping that is on par with what the NRT teams are able to produce. Yes, sir.
Jeff, what are your plans for next year?
So our plans for next year are to continue to support the Wisconsin Shipwreck Coast National Marine Sanctuary, to continue follow-on mapping operations in Thunder Bay National Marine Sanctuary. The plan is to have that Swath boat through the refit and integration process and be deployed as a mapping asset to work in the Lake Michigan area, to expand the mapping operations being conducted off RV Storm in the Lake Huron area, and to continue to work with the RV Echo in smaller, more distant project geographies in Lake Superior and Lake Michigan. Yes, sir.
John, from your on-the-ground data collection on route to delivery of your product to your users, where is your most common bottleneck?
So where is our common bottleneck from the cycle of acquisition to data delivery? We're able to set up field acquisition that can pretty much run continuous when the weather's good. We set up, when possible, we set up a field office or an online office on board the vessel to do near real-time data processing. So we're, in most cases, able to leave the field with clean, vertically referenced bathymetry data and can turn around deliverables pretty shortly thereafter. I think where we found the biggest bottleneck is in the data review process. So when we submit this stuff to stakeholder groups, in particular when we're working with SHPO offices, we have very large file sets that sometimes cover very large geographies that can take a long time to review and get approval and sign off on. So I think that the biggest bottleneck is that review period prior to public release. Yes, sir.
Are you investigating the use of uncrewed systems to augment the platforms that you're using?
Are we investigating the use of uncrewed systems to augment the platforms that we're using? As far as I am aware, we aren't investigating uncrewed systems as a force multiplier for geophysical mapping exclusively. The sanctuary has partnered with providers that have done uncrewed systems mapping, and I think there's a lot of other regional partners that have uncrewed systems capabilities that are coming into the project team to help with mapping and validation work. So it's probably discussions are being had, but they're at a higher level than I'm participating in. Yes, ma'am.
Do you know if similar mapping efforts are being done in other marine sanctuaries along the coast?
Okay, do we know if other mapping efforts are being done at marine sanctuaries, like out in the oceans and in other places? I believe so, and I believe that the other sanctuaries, you know, we coordinate with them. We hear of those sites sending personnel to the basic hydro class to get training to be able to participate. I think they have more access to the fleet ships and work with those platforms to do work in the oceans. So it does happen, but I am not aware enough of it to speak in an informed way about how it's happening.